Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Matt Bodnar. I am looking forward to this conversation. I consider you much younger than me, but I think you're one of the rising stars in this space. I see a lot of your ads going out. I've watched some of the content. I've seen you on some other shows. I've seen bits and pieces and highlight clips or stuff where you had another podcast that was fairly popular, millions of downloads, fairly popular. So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. I think there's a lot to learn from you here, and that's my goal. My goal on any podcast is I pick your brain, you talk 75% of the time, I talk 25% of the time. That's the goal. And so let's start off with letting everybody kind of know who you are. How did you get in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So going all the way back when I was in college, being a 19-year-old idiot or whatever, at the time I thought, what's the coolest job I could think of? Which was at the time, again, I'm not making a value statement, but it ended up being, I thought Wall Street sounded really cool, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
corporate raiders and takeovers and all that stuff. So I set my sights on working on Wall Street, ended up working at Goldman Sachs out of college for a number of years. And that taught me some of the basics of kind of finance and deals and that sort of thing. And then in 2011, I moved back to Nashville, which is where I'm from originally, and got involved and basically bought my first business shortly thereafter, which at the time was sort of a almost defunct IT service business that basically couldn't make payroll. And I came in, originally sort of structured a deal. At the time, I was in my early mid 20s. I didn't really know even what seller financing and earnouts and some of this stuff really meant,
Mm-hmm.
but I effectively structured a seller finance deal to come in, be like, hey, I'll see if I can help you guys fix this thing. So long story short, I ended up owning about 60% of the company at the end of the day, ran the business for about 6 years. We did a couple bolt-on acquisitions through that strategy. And then eventually I fired myself as CEO and brought a guy in to run the business. And because I realized, hey, I'm okay at being a manager and an operator, but I'm much better at doing deals, and really focus my time and efforts full time on acquisitions and building a portfolio. And so now I've got a holding company called Eidolon Capital where I focus on lower middle market acquisitions, typically classic blue collar baby boomer type stuff, very value oriented. I read one too many Berkshire Hathaway shareholder letters, so kind of skew towards long term buy and hold. In our current portfolio, we have a business that manufactures sinks. We have a company that does pallet racking and industrial distribution. We've got a staffing business that's sort of industrial staffing, got a beauty products brand, still have that IT business, which we also spun a software company out of eventually. It's a longer story, but today I really focus on just buying companies in the lower middle market. And it's always, as you know well, Ron, there's a lot of different adventures and stories and crazy stuff that can happen in that world. And so I also like to talk about it and share stories and ideas and stuff, and I have a good time doing it.
Well, cool. After the show, just remind me to ask you about your sink business. So I've got a client that we're buying kitchen and bathroom cabinet makers and countertop installers
Mm.
and stuff. So there might be some synergies there. One of the things you said about like idolizing the Wall Street funny. The funny thing is when I got into this space, I was in the military, but when I came out of the high school, I worked for my father and was an entrepreneur for a while, and then to pay for college, I went into the military. And one of my military buddies, him and I got really into that kind of the Wall Street. Like we thought about going into that space, but our favorite movie was Wall Street. Remember that?
Great movie.
Yeah. So the funny thing was when I got into the space 4 or 5 years ago, I hadn't talked to him in probably 6 or 8 years. We're still friends online, and I consider him a good friend. We're just both busy with life and have kids and stuff. And he had moved back to California, and I was still in Oklahoma at the time. I was like, I finally did. I'm getting into acquisitions and mergers. And then my first one went horribly wrong. I bought a really way too small before I got any mentoring and training. I just ran out and grabbed a very small pest control company and learned a bunch of valuable lessons and went and did this podcast and other stuff to make sure I don't do those mistakes again.
It's yeah, it's always better to learn from other people's mistakes, but it certainly hasn't prevented me from making myriad mistakes on my own as well. And like I've said this several times, but I've definitely learned that in most cases, my biggest headaches are usually my smallest deals, right? And like the more deals I do, the more I just ratchet up my size of my acquisition criteria. And the pickier I get, because right, you just keep accumulating these battle scars where it's like, okay, well, I don't want to do that anymore because that was a huge pain in the butt. I don't want to deal with that. Like, hey, that's too small. Hey, I've been to that rodeo, and so yeah, I think that's unless you're really ready for it and you're planning on more so buying a job than buying a business. I think a lot of folks can fall into the trap of buying deals that are too small. So I could totally see that.
And I agree. Something you said earlier is you figured out what you really liked, which was doing deals and negotiating. Same thing I did in the first part of this business. I realized I don't want to be the operator. I don't want to pull 40, 60 hours a week. I'm not really great at doing the same thing over and over again. And an operator has to create a system that's repeatable, right? I
Yep.
love to meet new people, have new conversations, and solve new problems. So I stay on the negotiation side of things and getting deals done. And a lot of times I just play a role in other people's, minority role in other people's projects so that I can go in and help them grow, do their stuff. I make some more money and I don't end up with a CEO title and an 80-hour work week.
Yep. Yeah. And I think we have a very similar philosophy there. It's like, I mean, I have kind of my holding company portfolio,
Mhm,
but my goal is basically excluding maybe bolt-ons for existing businesses. My goal is to do one good deal a year. And so that because I don't want to overload the system, right? I mean, I could go from a bandwidth standpoint and just a deal making standpoint. I have the horsepower to go do 5, 7, 10 deals a
mhm.
year, but I would choke on those deals in the back end. They'd be exploding and, be running around with my hair on fire. And so I don't want to overwhelm my kind of operating infrastructure, my oversight infrastructure. And so I similarly like often will like JV with folks or sort of help them get a deal done, maybe sit on the board, get a minority equity piece of the deal, just as an advisory standpoint, because it's like I love the deal part.
Mhm.
And if I can have a little piece of the pie, great. But like, and I still want to buy stuff for my own portfolio too. But I can't do as many deals as I would want to do without either going and building some huge monstrosity private equity entity that's not really interesting to me or choking on 10 deals a year that would be really hard to digest.
Yeah, I think if my kids were a little bit older and they weren't into now they're getting into the basketball and soccer and stuff, and I don't want to miss a game, right? Maybe then I would if I go back to that. I'm one of these guys. My son asked me, "Why don't you play video games with me very often?" I said, "Because I'm extremely competitive. If I touch your Xbox more than once, I'm gonna have to." And I grew up with the Atari, right? And Nintendo, I think was my fancy system. I played those games until they zeroed out, until I broke the game, until I like not just high score, until like the game didn't know what to do. So I'm a little obsessive. So like if I go into this full hearted and really like do something, I want to be like tiny acquisitions or the small the Warren Buffett of the lower middle market, and that would just take so much away right from my kids getting to hang out with me and go their time. We
Yep.
all choose our own path inside of this. One of the things I see on your content you put out and your ads and stuff, you talk about the zero down deals. A lot of people call those things fallacies, and I know as well as you do it's not. Let's talk about that
They're
for it's it's because it's a marketing term, right? It's not zero down. The owner gets money. It's just not coming from you necessarily. They get money
Yep.
from asset loans and just so many ways to structure these deals. But I think one of the biggest things that people don't get is if you're not seeing deals that you can put together, that way you don't have enough deal flow. So
Totally.
let's chat about deal flow and what it takes to actually do creative deals and what that seller profile looks like that's going to enable you to do these creative structure deals.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think you hit on a couple really like critical points that I think a lot of people miss. And I'll give you a couple case studies of zero down, like truly zero down deals and also zero out of pocket deals that I've done to give you a sense of like they're definitely doable. But the biggest thing that most people don't understand about doing deals without putting any capital in or zero down deals or whatever you want to call them is that it's largely a function of pipeline. It's largely a function of how many deals you actually look at, right? Which is what you said a minute ago. If you look at two deals, or if you go to Biz Buy Sell and peel out the first listing on there, that's not going to be a zero out of pocket deal, right? I mean, maybe some 0.1% probability that that's the case. If you look at 500 deals, which I literally looked at, I'll give you my stats. I'm like kind of weird about like tracking stuff. Like I'll give you my stats for like a year of deal making, exactly how many deals I looked at. Spoiler alert, it was 500. If you look at 500 deals, what are the odds that you're going to find one, two, three, four deals that are going to have a ridiculous deal structure, right? Or like have some really compelling economics or a real opportunity? They're much higher than if you're looking at three or four deals and you think that, hey, yeah, you can't do zero down. It definitely can be done, but the work you have to put in to do the zero down deal is you have to do the deal flow work. And so, but just to give you the stats, I tracked over the course of a 12-month period, I tracked every deal I looked at. I keep this like sheet of paper on my desk, kind of crazy, that has every conversation, every what I would call deal conversation that I have. So it's like conversation with a seller, lender, attorney, whatever, on like sourcing, closing deals, just to see like, to me, it's like a KPI. Am I putting in the inputs? Am I getting enough just like calls in? And I explicitly exclude note like texts and emails don't count, right? It has to either be a meeting or a phone call for it to count. And so I tracked that over the course of a year. And the stats were I looked at 500 deals, and looked at could be pretty broad, right? It's like maybe somebody emailed me a teaser and I was like, pass. But I looked at 500 deals. I did a deep dive on 100 of those deals. So I would consider a deep dive like sign the SIM or sign the NDA, went through the SIM, talked to the broker, some cases talking to the seller, you know what I mean, doing some homework. And then I submitted an LOI on 20 of those deals. And I'm like, the numbers are round. I looked at like 96 or something, right? I'm
Right.
rounding these off, but
Right.
like approximately enough. I submitted 20 LOIs and I closed 2 deals. So basically from 500 to looked really seriously at 100. Of those 100, I submitted LOIs on 20 of them. And of those LOIs, I closed 2 deals. So 10%, 10% of the deals I submitted an LOI on. And so that's a lot of deals, right? Like if you've looked at 10 deals so far,
Mhm.
you got 490 to go potentially before you find a zero out of pocket deal. So to me, deal flow is really, really critical. But I mean, I'll give you a couple just case studies, examples or whatever of some of the zero out of pocket deals that folks can do and that I've done. So a lot of it depends not only on pipeline, but it's also once you have a pipeline, you're looking at a lot of stuff. What are you filtering for to find deals like this, right? One of my favorite and easiest to do zero out of pocket deals. There are two kind of similar things. There's a little bit of a different twist depending on which one you're doing. One is what I call a business giveaway. One is what I would call an aqua hire. So they're basically the same thesis, but you execute them a little bit differently. So I'll do the business giveaway first to give you an example. A business giveaway, when I had my IT services business that I was running, we came across a guy who owned a data center, right? And he basically said, hey, I no longer want to be in the data center business. He was making about $400,000 a year in this data center. And he's like, hey, I'm going a different direction. Don't want to be in data center anymore. Like, is this something that's interesting to you guys? We negotiated a deal with him that was, we basically paid him 10% of revenue of the data center clients that we got from him for 3 years, and that was it. And we took over his book of business, and we penciled the math out. Whereas, like once we took it over, it was profitable for us to do that day one. And for him, it was a headache. He didn't want to deal with these clients. He just wanted to go focus on his main business, and that was a distraction. And then he got paid, and he got out of the headache that he was dealing with. So we solved his problem, and we ended up buying 400K of revenue for 40 grand a year or whatever over 3 years, which we ROI'd on day one.
Mm.
So that's a true zero down and zero out of pocket, right? We paid nothing and we gave him nothing at closing. We bought $400,000 of revenue, right? Which is great. Aquahire is similar, but not exactly the same. So Aquahire, the thesis is basically if the owner of the business wants to stay, I think it's a great model that's really, really interesting. And typically for those deals, I look to find sole proprietors. And this one works. The business giveaway and also the acquihire both work better if you're already in a space or you already own a business somewhere. So
Right.
if you're an existing business owner, it's a much better strategy than taking over somebody's business as you stepping in and operating it as like a new platform, right? So the acquihire strategy is basically, and I mean, I'll tell you a story of a deal we did like this, but like I see these deals constantly. Is somebody who's sole proprietor or very small company, total like let's say less than 5 employees, usually doing 250 to 500K of revenue. And a business like that, a lot of times, if you've ever read E-Myth or Michael Gerber, you've got kind of the technician, the manager, the entrepreneur. A lot of those people are really good at this, the craft or the technician, to use Michael Gerber's words, of what the business is, right? So if it's an IT business, they're really good technicians, but they're terrible at running a business and like paying their payroll taxes and doing their accounting and all that kind of stuff. And it's a huge pain in the butt, right? And they don't want to do sales, they don't want to do marketing, they just want to like help people fix their computers. Or if it's marketing, they just want to do graphic design, they don't want to deal with all the other stuff. But they've kind of wound in this thing where they're a sole proprietor and they're running a business and doing this. And so what I've seen is like those people, it's often a very compelling value proposition to them to say, if your business is doing 300K of revenue, you might be taking home what, 60 grand, 75 grand, right? Like maybe if you're super profitable, a little bit more than that. But to say to somebody like that, hey, are you tired of doing your payroll and having to deal with accountants and doing your taxes and constantly worrying about growing and, all of these other headaches? We'll hire you on, keep paying you 70 grand a year, whatever you're making. We'll give you some sort of commission structure on the customers you bring over. If their business grows, you can make even more money and come join us, and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore. And we'll take care of your clients. We'll bring your employees over if you have employees. And typically, like we did a deal in our medical equipment business. We bought a company that was selling catheters, sole proprietorship, sales guy doing like literally 300K a year of revenue, exact same pitch. He was a salesman, didn't want to deal with all the other stuff. He came over, happy as a lark, came and basically put him on salary for what he was making out of his business, and we instantly added 300K of revenue to our company. So, and I do a lot of, I'm pretty active in the agency world right now, which we talked a little bit about in the pre-show. I think it's a really fascinating sector where there's a lot going on. But I mean, I can give you 3 stories of agency owners I've talked to in the last 3 or 4 months. One was a lady doing like 400K of revenue. She wants to leave and go start a candle making business, but she doesn't want to leave her clients high and dry that she's had for years and years and years. Another one was a lady who has like a degree in, I think it was like customer experience or something. She wants to go do something totally different. But again, she's been in business for 10 years and she's like, I'm so loyal to these clients. Like I'm waiting on somebody who can take care of them, but I don't want to leave them. Those are perfect opportunities for the right business to say, hey, I'll take them over. I'll give them a home. You go do your next thing and we can pay you something too. That was a long answer. But those are a couple examples of real zero out of pocket deals that I've done that you can do. And it's really a function of pipeline. And then beyond that, it's also a function of understanding. And this is really underappreciated, but like, what does the seller want to accomplish, right? What are the goals? What are their pains? What are their needs? Because if you understand those things, you can help structure a deal that meets their needs and also can potentially be a deal that has little to no upfront cash. There's lots of other ways to do zero down deals too, or zero out of pocket deals, but without going on another 10-minute TED talk about it, like those are a couple examples of those real deals that can be done for $0 down.
Absolutely. You brought up a very good point, and we talk about this on the show. We even had a few whole shows about it. But people ask me all the time, what are the top 2 or 3 skills they need to have to be in this space? Do they need to go do an ETA program? Do they need to do that? And I'm like, first thing I always ask is, do you have any operation experience? Because if you're wanting to be the CEO, you need to have some leadership experience or something. You don't want to cut your
Yep.
teeth on somebody else's baby here. But other than that, my first thing is it's rapport, right? More than anything, like I don't
Huge.
care if you can't read a financial balance sheet and an income statement. We can teach you that in an hour. I can give you a Udemy course or something, and we can get you started. That's
Yep.
not a problem. The problem is if you can't connect with people and truly be interested in who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, and help them get there, you're going to have a hard time in this space because that's more important to these small business owners 85-90% of the time than the check you're going to cut them. I've heard
Most
story
definitely.
after story after story where somebody won a deal with a lesser offer because they built a deeper rapport with the seller. It is almost more often, I would say probably 60 to 70% more often, that the highest offer doesn't get the deal. It's the guy who has the best connection and the safest pair of hands for that business owner who gets the deal.
Totally. And I mean, that's part of I mean, you touched on earlier kind of taking the market position of Berkshire Hathaway,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that's our approach is we try to intentionally differentiate ourselves from traditional private equity by building a deep relationship with the seller, understanding what they want to accomplish and showing them, hey, a future with us is we're going to take care of your employees. We're going to keep your name on the door. We're not going to gut the business and sell it again in 3 years. And we really want to build a long-term enterprise and we want to take care of the people that are here. And I think that resonates. Like there's a lot of sellers who care way more about legacy and taking care of their stakeholders and their people and their clients and their team than they do about cashing out for the absolute top dollar. And I found that to be a really compelling market position, I guess, for lack of a better term, that really helps us differentiate from folks. And the cornerstone of that is, I think, two things. One, you hit on it. We both talked about it. Rapport is massive, right? People think, oh yeah, soft skills, blah blah blah. Yeah, rapport. I'm sure it's important. Like, I'll tell you two stories of like how much I over invest massively in rapport. So, like, a little mini example, I was on a call at like a cold prospect call the other day, right? I do a lot of like outbound. I booked somebody into my calendar from cold email.
Mhm.
Never met this guy in my life, didn't know anything about him. We spent the first 9 minutes of our, it was a 30-minute call, right? And I have a bunch of calls stacked back to back. So we, like, time is relatively precious. There's a lot to convey in that first 30 minutes. I spent the first 9 minutes of that call talking about breakfast meat. So he's from New Jersey. My wife's from Philly. And we like talked about, there's like a certain type of breakfast meat in sort of South Jersey versus North Jersey. They have like different opinions on it. They call it a different name. It's called pork roll or Taylor ham, depending on where you're from. Not that we need to get into that, but like, I spent 9 minutes talking about breakfast meat with this guy, right? And like, that really helped cement the relationship, because to me, that 9 minutes is way more important than like grilling him about what was your 22 revenue and why was it 23% over this and what, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, that stuff can come later, but the rapport is really essential. Another story of like an even more extreme example of this, my director of portfolio ops and I we flew to Detroit and then we drove to Toledo, Ohio a couple months ago, kind of like last fall. And we were looking at a plastic injection molding business. And interesting deal, it was off market, kind of connected with the seller, thought it looked compelling. And, we flew out there and we get to this guy's office and we rolled up, went into their, I'll call it a boardroom, but like, I mean, you've probably been in, these manufacturing companies, like, this wasn't like a fancy boardroom that you would picture. It was like super old school. But we went into their boardroom and we spent the first 2 hours and 15 minutes that we were there, we did not even touch on anything business related. Like, all we did, we talked about like fishing in Lake Michigan, and his son got married recently. And like, we were just like shooting the breeze and joking around and talking. And then eventually we're like, oh, I guess, should we talk about business stuff? Sure. And so it's like that to me, my general rule of thumb is I will almost never break, like, if we're in a rapport building phase of a conversation, I'll almost never break rapport first. So like, if they want to keep talking about fishing, I'll keep talking about fishing. You know what I mean? Not that I'm a fisherman, but like, if they want to keep just like, oh yeah, and tell me about your kids and what's going on here, and like, oh, have you ever been to this taco place, and you know what I mean? All this stuff, like, I'll go as long as they go. Cause to me, that is way more valuable than anything else in the deal. Because if we have rapport, then we can navigate tough situations. If we have rapport, then we can come up with a deal structure that's workable for everybody and that's much more interesting and creative. If we have rapport, it makes everything else 10 times easier. And if you don't, then you're dead in the water. So I'm a huge fan of investing in rapport.
I am too, and one of the things I ask people all the time when they come on our, because we do a hangouts and stuff with acquisition entrepreneurs twice a month, and if somebody's telling me they're having a hard time getting deals, like, "I've been at this for 12 months and I don't have any deals done." Like, "Okay, what are you talking about? Have you first, are you actually getting on the phone with people?" Right? "Oh, no, I'm sending
That
out
is
email." Like, no, you have to have real conversations, at least Zoom calls, right? You gotta get it, you need, if you can't get to somebody in person, there's a lot more to it that, in person, there's a lot more, it's faster to easy and easier to build rapport, shaking somebody's hands, looking them in the eye in person than ever will be on Zoom.
100%.
But it can be done on Zoom. We do it all the time now. The first and foremost, are you having real conversations with somebody that you can see? Are you on a Zoom call or something like that? And then the second thing is, what do you guys talk about when you're on there? Well, I talk about like their business and their financials. I was like, that's why you're not getting anything done. Because you're like every other call, especially if you're picking these deals off of Biz by Sell or some other brokerage site. They got 30 calls on the first month they had that listed, and everybody did exactly what you're doing. The people I
Yep.
see getting deals done are doing what you're doing. They're doing the rapport building. The guys I see doing 12 deals in the first, 3 years of being in this space, and whether it's contract or equity and partial deals or whatever, where they've advised on
Yep.
20 and they're some of them are their own and they're helping some other people get done. It's because they're really good at building rapport. And so the second skill I would say inside, and it's part of that rapport building, is a skill inside of rapport building that I refer to as active listening, right? It's really being able to
Yep.
shut down your own conversation in your head and just hearing what somebody says. Here's a trick I do, and it might be useful for you. A lot of times on Zoom calls, we have more than one person from our team that are on the Zoom call with the owner. And if we do, somebody on that team is usually the dedicated listener, right? Their job,
Mm.
like my job, because I run a podcast and I talk to people all the time, is usually facilitating the conversation. Somebody's job
Yep.
in there is to make notes and send messages to, like, if I'm sitting here right now, if I had a camera behind me, see there's 4 monitors in front of me, right? They can send a chat message and go, "Hey, he looks distracted," or, "Hey," especially if they have multiple people on there, we have their Zoom windows to see everybody. We've had cases where somebody says when we asked, when we got to the financials, when the CEO started talking about the financials, "Does anybody else see the CFO roll his eyes when he said that?" Right? So the dedicated
Yeah,
listener
that's really
picks up things that nobody else is there. Their job is to watch everybody's facial expressions, body expressions, and listen for tonality shifts and changes and body posture changes and make notes of it. But it's important that you truly understand where somebody's trying to get. And that's the whole thing
yeah,
about active listening, rapport building, and all that. It's not as often as most people think, is they're not trying to get a big fat check. That's not the problem they're trying to solve. The problem solve is they're trying to solve is they're done and, in the business, and they need somebody that's gonna take over and be safe with their customers and their employees,
that's
or
exactly.
they're trying to retire and they do need some money. But it's usually not what you think their problem is. I would say if you look at somebody, talk to them for 2 minutes, and you try to tell me what they're trying to solve, I'll tell you you're absolutely wrong. 'Cause they're even if you ask them, "What are you trying to solve?" The first 3 times 2 to 3 times they tell you that, if you come out and just directly ask it, it's gonna be a facade.
Totally. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I agree. I think active listening is super, super critical. And to me, that sort of sub piece of that, I love the idea of like micro expressions and stuff. I think that's really smart. But like that element of really trying to deeply understand, what do they want to do? Like,
Mm,
why are they selling? And not just like, oh, I'm selling because I want to retire. You know what I mean? Or what it's like, what are the things that matter to them? And how can you, because if you understand that, then you can frame the whole offer
mhm,
around that. You know what I mean? And you can make it about, hey, this is a process where I'm going to help you get all the stuff that you want.
yeah,
And if you're able to do that, right, there's that old quote which is like kind of cheesy, but it's like you can have everything you want in life as long as you help
people
enough other
e
people get what they want,
right.
right? Um, and so
Zig Ziglar, right?
like
I think it was Zig Ziglar. Yeah,
I think it's a Zig
yeah.
quote. But like, yeah, I mean if you can do that, if you help them get what they want and you find a structure where everybody wins, then it's a great outcome. And that's like, I mean, maybe there's other ways to do deals, but like every deal I've ever done was done that way of like figuring out what the seller wanted, solving that for them, and then having a deal structure that worked for both sides.
I'll put a disclaimer on here. This works until you have a cap table that has 3 or more investors in it or outside investors. Once you get 3 or
Yes.
more partners, I won't even talk to people there's more than, usually if there's a 3rd wheel, unless I know all 3 are on board, not interested. That's my absolute limit. 3 is the limit. And then if you have outside investors, now we're talking kind of the PE negotiation style where it is
It's a
about
totally
numbers and
different.
everything's changes.
Yes.
Like, it's a totally different
Yep.
game. And that's the cool thing about this space. We talked about zero down deals, right? You talked about 2 or 3 different ways. I can probably pop off the top of my head about 15 different ways, right? One of my favorite things, I'm a prior real
Yeah.
estate guy. Tell me you own real
Yep.
estate that you want to get rid of with the deal, and I'll say, "Hey, let's talk," right? Because I know what a sale
Yep.
leaseback is, and I know that with the right buyer and the right broker, I can get a premium on your real estate that you could never get as a seller. You as a seller can't commit to the new buyer that you'll be in that place for 15 years. I can. So
Yep.
when he looks at his capped, what he wants for, a commercial piece of real estate, when that buyer looks at that and says, "Who's going to be my tenant for the next 2 to 3 years?" Like, "Oh, you're selling the business? You're going to get a discounted offer." I come in and say, "Look, I'll sign a 15-year lease on this with a guaranteed increase every 3 years at a certain, like, we'll negotiate it, make sure it works for both parties." But I've seen that fund entire deals more than once. Not only mine, but just I haven't pulled the trigger on that for me, but I've seen a lot of the guests on here and a lot of people I know in this space that would go out and buy a $1 or $2 million business and fund the entire thing by the real estate that was sitting on there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've never done, I mean, I've looked at a couple deals where that was kind of the would have been the financing
Mhm.
mechanism. But similarly, like I know multiple people who've done a sale leaseback deal where the sale leaseback paid for the entire acquisition. And maybe even they had some extra money, like
That's
extra working capital or,
yeah.
closing proceeds for themselves on top of that. Especially if you're hunting around, which is a lot of where I'm looking for stuff in these sort of like old school industrial, like a lot of companies from like the 70s own their land.
Mhm.
And if you can find a way to do that, it can get really interesting to do some sale leasebacks. So that, yeah, that's another, not necessarily $0 cash at closing, but zero out of pocket
Mhm.
needed to close a deal type scenario. So
And there's
great
like there's
example.
dozens of those, right? There's if they're heavy in assets or people loan you money against the
Yeah.
assets. There's
Same thing with ABL.
yeah,
Yeah.
accounts receivable, all those different things are lendable assets. So anybody trying to say
T-
there's no such thing as no money down deals is like, well, yeah, like it's not necessarily it's a bad marketing phrase a lot of times to say zero down because you want to don't want to limit yourself to zero down. It's zero out of my pocket, right? Um,
Yes, exactly. And I mean, you can do a deal that's 100% cash at close
mhm,
that's still 0 out of your pocket, right?
exactly.
Like the last company I bought, it was a long story, but we bought the company out of receivership. The company was doing well, but like the owners had kind of gotten into some trouble. And because it was like a court mandated sale, we had to close in all
Mhm,
cash, but I put $0 personally into that deal, right?
mhm,
So, I mean, it's totally possible, even if you're closing all cash. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at creative structures, but I think there's also a tendency, as you just hit on, like there's a tendency for folks to try to get too creative. And sometimes the simplest deal is just like go get an SBA loan and make it happen. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes you want to get creative. And to me, the typical strategy I'll have for underwriting something, which is kind of my rough rule of thumb, and the more deal experience you have, the easier this gets to do, is like I can just look at a company's balance sheet or a company's financials, and 5 minutes I can tell you how much I could borrow on that company.
mhm,
You know what I mean? I can be like, okay, I could sell the land for this, or I could get this much inventory, this much receivables. I could get a $3 million loan for this thing, or whatever. But like, just because I've talked to hundreds of lenders and financed lots of different deals,
yeah,
I mean, just I always start with look at the asset base, right? Inventory, FF&E, receivables, land, etc., and then figure out what can you get a loan for on that asset base, and then that's the starting offer, right? It's like, hey, I'll give you, if I can get a $2 million loan, it's 2 million at close, and then we'll carry the rest.
well,
And if you underwrite 20 deals that way and submit offers, like one of those deals will probably close, and then you'll just have bought a company not for zero at closing, but for zero out of pocket.
there's been some like the last week or so, a lot of people are popping up and saying, "Hey, the silver tsunami is not going to happen. There's too many buyers in the space." And I don't think that's true either. I think that there's too many buyers trying to fight over there too many lazy buyers is how I like to play it. I'm kind of being mean in that. They're all trying to fight over the broker listed deals on Biz Buy Sell. But if you're willing to go start conversations and go talk to the off market deals and go talk to the business owners, there are enough businesses out there that it's a numbers game still. You gotta get your deal flow up and get your phone ringing and start ringing the phone of other people.
I mean, and I also like the crazy thing to me, or the interesting thing to me about M&A that is just a little different than real estate in a lot of cases, is like real estate's obviously seen a much more competition, consolidation over the last 10, 15 years, setting aside the current rate environment, which is a whole different beast in the real estate market. But like, to me, the difference in M&A, which I agree with you that I don't agree with the premise that the silver tsunami won't happen, or it's too competitive. Like, you only need really one good business to be like to hit it out of the park. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? You don't need to buy a portfolio of 50 companies,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if you're buying houses, like it's hard to sustain yourself off the rental income of a single
Yeah.
house, or even like a couple duplexes or whatever, depending on obviously what you're renting them for and how you finance them and all that. But like, so you need to keep gobbling, gobbling, gobbling. Like, if you buy one plumbing company, it's making 750 grand a year. When you put an SBA loan down, like you could, after debt service, be pulling down 2 or 300 grand. And, you know, run that thing. I mean, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, most of these businesses are crazy under optimized when you buy them too, right? Like, we bought a medical equipment company a couple years ago that when we bought it, the entire business was operated on paper, like the carbon copy, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Fill it out. They didn't have any digital systems at all. The whole business was like, people would sit there, like a customer would come in and be like, hey, I need some catheters. And they would be like, great, let me spend 15 minutes filling out a worksheet and then hand it to the other person. And that, you know what I mean? It was nuts.
Right.
So the whole thing was on paper. Their entire marketing budget was a TV commercial from 1993 that didn't have any products that they stocked in inventory, that they aired every
Mhm.
single week on TV. So it's like, let's digitize the business. Let's stop paying for this TV ad and start investing in like paid media. And we grew revenue by like 30% by just taking the same ad spend and putting it in like Google
Yeah.
ads, right? It's not rocket science. So if you bought a plumbing company and you did half the time, I bought multiple businesses that didn't even have websites. I bought a company doing $10 million of revenue, no website, right? No sales team, nothing.
Yeah.
So it's like you put in some basic systems and you can go a long way. And so that comes back to like answering the question about the silver tsunami, because you only need one deal.
Yeah.
And there's an insane amount of baby boomers out there, right? It's crazy because there's all the like dad's got a company that manufactures shelving, and the kid wants to be a TikTok influencer. You know what I mean?
Right.
They don't want to go shelving business. And so they're either going to close or they're going to get consolidated, or somebody they would much rather sell to a 32-year-old hungry entrepreneur that's like, hey, I'm going to breathe life into this thing and take it to the next level. And then they're like, great, that sounds amazing. Let me sell my business to you instead of some suit from New York that's going to like gut the company and fire half my staff.
Yeah. I get it. I grew up a painter's son. My dad was an entrepreneur most of his life. He painted houses from the time I was 16 to the time I was 20. I ran his painting company. He handed it to me, and I grew it to the point we had full crews, like 3 houses with sometimes more, but there was always at least 3 crews out there painting. We do 100 houses a year at least. We were
Wow.
busy. We were
That's
doing
big.
high six figures, or mid six figures in revenue. And as a 16, 17-year-old kid, I was making almost 6 figures in my pay, like what I was taxable income. But that said, uh, sometimes I wonder if I'd continued doing that, how big would that thing be now if I bought other painting companies and other remodeling companies and ran it for 40 years? I have a good friend of mine, unfortunately, 3 years ago, he passed away of a heart attack in the middle of the night. But his dad tried to groom him for a multi-million dollar accounting type of job, and he just didn't wanna do it. So he's like, "I'm bad at math." His whole life, he had this mentality, like, "I'm horrible at math." He did okay. He was a crane operator inside of skyscrapers, right? Like, they
Pretty
make good
cool.
cash.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And both of those, I mean, I don't know how those stories ended for either of those companies, but like both of those are probably great candidates for an acquisition entrepreneur, right? Hey, you could probably do it. I don't know, like I'd be curious if you want to unpack the painting company's history, like what happened to it,
Yeah.
because
I turned it back to my
like
father when I joined the military at age 20. He ran it as a part-time kinda he downscaled the crews and kept most of the relatives around, but he just downscaled everything, kinda ran it until he passed. He passed early in life too, at 60 with cancer.
I mean, well, I mean, even just taking that as an example without going to the accounting business, like imagine if somebody had come to him who was
Mhm.
young, hungry, and they were like, "Hey, I want to take over this business or find a way for you to transition out." Like he basically did what I think a lot of these businesses are just going to end up doing is they just sort of wind it down, and then, poof, right? Like if somebody came and offered him some sort of like zero cash earnout structure where they kind of earn into the business, own it, phase him out over time, and his legacy continues on. They buy a business that's doing almost $1 million a year of revenue, right? Like easy deal to tee up for the right person. And it's a better outcome for him than just winding the business down, which is what a lot of these sellers are facing down. And I see so many people that I mean, I looked at a deal like a couple days ago. It's like a rubber manufacturing business.
Mm,
These guys are doing $12 million a year of revenue, and like they're basically breaking even. And they also own like ironically, maybe there's a sale leaseback opportunity there, but like they're not charging the business rent. And it's like if you charge a business a market rate rent, like the business will be losing money. I mean,
mhm.
losing like $500,000 a year probably because they had like 75,000 square foot warehouse or something, and that business has been around for a long time. It's like those guys don't have an exit strat. Like they might just close down a $12 million business
Yeah.
doing $12 million because there's nobody who wants to buy it. It's too complicated. It's too small. It's like I looked at it and I was like, dude, I don't think I want to buy this thing. But like maybe somebody who was the more creative or was willing to get their hands dirty could figure out a way to make that thing really interesting. So it's just crazy to me how many businesses are like unoptimized, no exit strategy, no succession plan, and those things are why zero down deals are possible,
Yeah.
because you find people who what you're doing is you're solving somebody's problem. You're solving their succession problem, solving their exit problem, you're giving their business a home. And it's something that's valuable. Like it's a real value to a seller, especially one who isn't prepared or ready. And so I think I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks. And to me, I still think the sellers massively outweigh the buyers. And there's going to be tons of companies that just never end up with a home and have to wind down like that. And it's sad, right? I mean, that's like part of the reason that I without going on like a moral crusade, like I think it's generally like, I think you're doing a good thing if you buy a company and you keep everybody employed and like build the business instead of just letting it die out, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
you look at the classic tale of like the company town, and the plant closed down and then the town's dead in
yeah.
5 years. You know what I mean? So I think if you could be that person that could save the company town, like you're creating value for tons of people. So anyway,
I think the number 2 skill, like we talk about, like, building rapport and active listening, part of that building that thing. I think the secondary skill inside of this is the ability to build a team. So you're looking at these companies and being able to look at a company like that and go, "I don't know if I want the rubber making company." If you could look at something like that, you go, "You know what? I don't want this," but if they had this type of CFO, they could actually do, that has a forensics ability to clean up their books and do some stuff, and this type of chief operating officer that could understand lean manufacturing and really shape this up because they've never even looked at the lean manufacturing protocol. We might be able to turn this
yep.
around. So I think the second skill on top of rapport building is looking at something and go, setting your own ego aside and going, you know what? This company needs this guy, and this guy to make it rock. I may not be those guys, but now I can pencil in the job description of the 3 people I need, and then we can continue to have a conversation. That is a unique skill that I think more acquisition entrepreneurs need to be able to develop fairly quickly.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is kind of related to that, but not exactly the same, is a lot of acquisition entrepreneurs, you'll hear this narrative all the time, like work on the business, not in it, which I think is very good advice generally. But I think you should work in it for a little while before you work on it. And I think a lot of folks who want to become an acquisition entrepreneur and they think, hey, I'm just going to buy this company. I've never run a company before. I'm just going to put somebody in place as management and I'm just going to go to the beach. You know what I mean? That's definitely not how it goes, right? Like the first company I bought, I ran it for 6 years
Yeah.
before replacing myself. And now because I've done that journey, I understand what I'm looking for. I know what I want to see. When I buy a business, like I want it to have a management team, or we're going to be like immediately putting a president or something in place if they don't have anything like that. But like I'm able to approach it that way because I've been through the journey. I think it's possible to do it just cold, but I think it's a lot harder than being at least willing to sort of say, hey, I'm okay to kind of roll my sleeves up and be in the driver's seat of this thing for 6 months, 18 months, and kind of get the pulse of it and understand what's going on and really how the customers think and act and how the cash flows flow through the business and that kind of stuff can really help you understand the business better and become a better owner ultimately if you know what an operator should be paying attention to.
That's taught in a lot of these mentoring programs. Just buy it, put an operator in. So one of the friends, it seemed fishy to me when I first got into the space. And luckily for me, I have a really good friend who just recently passed law school. So now as soon as he takes the bar, he's an attorney. So I don't know he's got his JD, but he hasn't passed the bar yet. But fortunately for me, him and his soon to be ex-wife, that's another story altogether. They owned a staffing firm for years. So I just got him on the phone one day. And I said, what is the executive search time frame? Now they placed high-end, like, engineers, but they kept looking into getting into the executive search. So I knew they had done the research. And they said minimum 6 months, maximum or an average 18 months. That's the industry average to replace a CEO or C-level employee with a good one. So my rule of thumb is if you can't get in there and run that thing yourself for 6 months to 18 months, willing to fly there, live there, and run it, at least for the first 6 months until you got a good GM or somebody, a general manager or somebody that
Yep.
you can manage remotely, you'd better be able to be on site. You probably shouldn't be messing with these things. And because you're putting a lot, especially on things where your personal guarantee, and you did that SBA loan. Now you've used every
Yeah.
asset you had in the world to guarantee this business. And I,
It's a
I
lot.
I promise you, they will. If you get in the rears with them, they'll force you to sell. A young lady in her 20s bought a really cool $3-4 million company. The industry changed on her a little bit, and now she can't cover her debt. So the SBA is forcing her to sell to cover the
Wow.
loan. So it's a forced sell. They basically said sell or file, or we're going to have to start seizing assets. So understand that if you buy these and you don't, and I don't think it was any fault of her own other than she had indicators that the seller was malicious before she closed. And that should have been a red flag.
Interesting.
Meaning that
Can
the seller ended up, violating the non-compete and created a competing company, and 2 or 3 of the, top employees that were with her went off and tried to create their own employee because they were trying to buy it, and he didn't tell her that she had C-level employees trying to buy the company. So the day she stepped in there, I'm like, "We're just gonna go do this on our own." So, because they weren't
Dang,
under the same NDA.
that's
But that
awesome.
said, just understand that
That's
you
why you
sign
need
these
to roll it
personal guarantees, you better be able to operate it, right? I just think that's a fallacy a lot of people think, "I'm gonna buy it and stick a good operator in." Yeah, that's a great goal, but understand
Yep.
you're gonna be the operator on off and on throughout the life of that business. 6 months here, 18 months there, will you find the right person? Somebody has a heart attack, stroke, or God forbid, just quits on you, right? Who's gonna run it then? And, it's overlooked by that mentality. It's like, "I'm gonna buy something, stick an operator in."
Yep, totally agree. And I mean, that story, that cautionary tale you just shared too, is a good example of why I think it's important to have a decent amount of seller financing. That may not have bailed out that deal and may not have made an impact,
Mhm,
but like you have 20%, 30%, whatever the purchase price held as a seller note, that's a balloon, especially.
mhm.
You could use that to claw back or shrink down your liabilities, or it's a way to at least have some recourse against stuff like that happening that's
Absolutely,
outside of your
absolutely.
control that maybe the seller didn't disclose or whatever. You want to have some means of coming back at them.
So to fill in the loop to anybody out there that's OCD and wondering what happened to the accounting firm, he did sell to a private equity or a strategic purchaser. The only reason I know is, like I said, it's a friend of mine's father. I'm friends with him on LinkedIn. I see him still writing for it, and it's under a different name. So it was either a
Oh,
strategic
nice.
purchase or So anyway, so it did sell eventually, but it wasn't the son. The son unfortunately passed away of a heart attack, but the father did sell it off. But, it doesn't always happen that way. There was nothing I could do. The owner passed away of a heart attack. They had, I wanna say 27 trucks, and it was commercial electrical. They did mostly big commercial buildings and stuff. They did some residential, but usually high-end homes that had special electrical needs or whatever. So they mostly did commercial stuff. So, real quick, what is your search right now? I know you help some other people do deals and stuff. What is your current what I call a buyer's box or something? Or is there a certain buying criteria that you like, and what do you recommend if everybody I've ever talked to has a different method on how they tell people to develop their own buyer's box. So what's your thought on that process? Buyer box is like what it is you should buy, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my buy box, I'll tell you my current you want my buy box or like how I got to my buy box? Because they're not necessarily the same thing.
Tell us both because I think it's interesting because I know my current one wasn't the one I started with either. As a matter of fact, I spent 6 months looking at coffee manufacturing companies thinking I wanted to be in that space because I could turn them into subscription
Interesting.
models.
All right, I'll tell you both. So my buy box is pretty simple. So I'm looking for companies. I'm based in Nashville, so southeast based
Mhm,
generally.
mhm,
About 1 to 5 million of EBITDA is kind of the sweet spot. I won't really go lower than that. Really prefer 2 million or more of EBITDA, but I'll look at stuff with one. Maybe go a little bit bigger than that, but that's kind of the strike zone. Typically looking for family founder owned businesses, industry agnostic. So I'll look at really any industry, but with a focus around kind of what we talked about, right? Like I'm looking for folks who don't necessarily want to sell to some big private equity firm. I'm not interested in being the highest bid at a 40-person auction. I'm looking for companies that want to find a home and somebody to take care of their business. And, that's how we have kind of a diversified portfolio of stuff that we've come across. And our goal is to hold these businesses for the long term and continue to operate them. Obviously, we'll sell things if we get a ridiculous offer or we feel like it's the right strategic timing in the market or whatever, but we typically want to hold in perpetuity. And so I'm really looking for, often ends up being kind of manufacturing, industrial services, general business services, that kind of stuff. But those are broadly the areas that I'm currently the most active or most interested. How I got there, I read too much Warren Buffett, right? So I said, hey, I want to buy long-term enduring businesses. I want to buy them in a way where they're not super expensive. And I don't want to like one of my IT business, we actually spun a software company out of it. And when I first started wanting to do additional acquisitions and we bought another software business into that software company as well, I was like, hey, I want to go buy software companies because I love software. And it's like one of the best business model that exists, right?
mhm.
But what you know very quickly if you do anything in software is like software companies are crazy expensive. And I mean, they trade for 5 times revenue. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. It could be 2, 3 times revenue, it could be 10 times revenue, which is massive. And so you can't do a lot of these creative deal structures are way, 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 way harder to do for a software company, right? Because if you need to come up with 10 times revenue or even 5 times revenue, might be like 30 times EBITDA. You know what I mean? Or a lot of them burn and don't have any EBITDA. So it's like you're not going to be doing a leverage buyout. You're not going to be doing some sort of asset based deal. You're not going to be
Right.
doing a sale lease back where you sell them their warehouse back. So to have deals that are more attractively priced, I typically play in the manufacturing space, and it's all about buying them at the right price, holding them long term for cash flow, and hopefully they're enduring businesses that aren't, are hard to disrupt. So like if you're manufacturing some industrial component, hopefully maybe AI can enhance your business, but hopefully it's not going to vanish overnight. If you're fabricating componentry for like the domestic power grid, hopefully that stuff is like relatively enduring. So
Right.
that's sort of how I structure my buy box.
I really think there's a space here in this industry to just really look at things and optimize things differently. Because like, you were talking about that medical supply company. I had an opportunity to chat with a medical supply company in the first part of this, and I really wanted to work with the guy. Funny thing was, is when he got on the phone with me, he's like, "I don't know why that guy told you, it was a referral." He goes, "I don't know why he told you I wanted to sell this business. I would never sell this business. This is my cash cow." And I was like, "Okay." So talking goes, "But I am curious about what you're doing and everything." So we chatted for probably an hour or two, and turns out he's a retired fire chief. He has a medical supply shop, and he only sells to fire and ambulances, and he basically everything in his medical supply goes into a fire truck or an ambulance, right? So that's all he does. So there's no wheelchairs or walkers. Basically, if it doesn't go inside of a fire rescue or a ambulatory business or something, the emergency room, like a triage type of thing, he just doesn't carry it. And he was doing, I want to say, 2.5, $3 million a year revenue, six figure, high six figure, and mid six figures profit. But he's only doing like six cities. He's in Oklahoma. He did Tulsa, of course, right? He did Oklahoma City. I think he went to Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. Like basically, if he could get there and back in an hour and a half, 2 hours, he was working with that. But he didn't do anything online. He
Smart.
didn't do anything else. And I was like, there was just so much. And he didn't hit any of the small towns, any of the small ambulatory services, or anything like that. He just went and got 4 or 5 of the big contracts from these bigger towns, and that was comfortable. He hit his comfort zone. So, that said, there's a lot of those companies out there. You look at them and go, "You know what? With a little bit of marketing and a little bit of salesmanship, this could be doing 2x, 3x what it does now." Like, he had room in his he
Yep.
even had room in the warehouse he was using. He wasn't at capacity anywhere.
Tons of low hanging
Yeah,
fruit in a lot of these
yeah,
in these baby boomer businesses and these blue
yeah,
collar, these kind of industrial esque distribution businesses,
yeah.
et cetera.
He had
Tons of low hanging fruit.
he had 2 sales reps. They were both retired firemen, and they only wanted to work 8 or 10 hours a week themselves, right? So he had no like, but nobody was working full time in this thing at all. So,
It's crazy.
yeah, if you took it serious, like, what could you do if you really seriously went after this? That said, there's a lot of those businesses out there, so there's a huge opportunity here. How do people find you, work with you, get your material? Because I know you put a lot of information out there. I know. I see. I was teasing you beforehand. I was like, I see your ads everywhere. That's because I clicked on one once and it's following me. You're doing a really good job online because they follow me around. So if I'm on Facebook, I see something from me. If I, which is good. But how does somebody like reach out to you? What is the best way to either bring a deal to you that you might be interested in, or just kind of be on your newsletter and see what you're doing and kind of participate with you, maybe even do a deal with you at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to find me is my newsletter.
Mhm,
So it's just mattbodner.com. You can find my newsletter right there
mhm,
and sign up for it. And I personally respond to every single email that I get. So if you sign up and send me an email, I'll write back.
mhm,
It'll just be little old me. And folks send me deals on there, but I mean, I talk about all kinds of inside baseball, how I find deals, how I source them,
mhm.
go through tons of different sourcing methodologies, financing, case studies, and deal reviews, and that kind of thing. So if anybody wants to dig in deeper, my newsletter is packed full of tons of insights and strategies and ways to talk about doing deals.
And I should have said this before the show started in our pre-interview. It's always, always, always okay on our show to have a pitch or something. Do you have a course or anything like that that people can do and learn, or still
I don't yet.
okay?
I'm potentially R&Ding a course, so it hasn't gone live. We don't have anything yet. But if you're on the newsletter, we have a wait list for if we launch a course in the future.
Okay.
So
I should have told you that
definitely.
ahead of time. It's always okay. As a matter of fact, I'll encourage you. Like if you were
No
still
worries.
active in your podcast, we would promote your podcast too. I know that's kind of your side passion now, but I am a big fan in blue ocean, strategies here and anything you've got out there that people can work with you. That's why you're here. You're out here to tell people who you are, what you're doing, and you'd like some really cool people to work beside you because this is a team project,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? I appreciate it. Do you have if let's leave it at this. This is one of my favorite things to do at the end. If somebody can only remember one or two things from this show, what would be the takeaways? What would you want people to know you for and to work on to be successful in this space?
I would say the biggest takeaway would be get on the phone and talk to sellers and listen to them.
Mhm.
and build rapport with them. That's the game. It's not crunching fancy numbers and hardball negotiating tactics and all that stuff. It's getting on the phone, talking to probably more people than you think you need to talk to, right? Sellers, lenders, capital sources, and it's just a lot of conversations, but that's how you do deals. Is you've got to talk to people. And if you're not doing that, then it's going to be really hard to get a deal across the finish line.
Absolutely. Well, I'll make sure all your contact information's in the show notes so people can find it. Thank you for being here today, Matt, and we'll call that a show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Ron. Great conversation. Love to hear what you're up to and talk about some fun things in the life of doing deals.
I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.